After a string of reports this week that Iran was shutting down talks, Trump told CNBC he couldn't care less if the negotiations had bogged down and even mused they had become boring. Boring. That is the word. The President of the United States, the Commander in Chief, who ordered the strikes on February 28th that started the war, who called it Operation Epic Fury, and who said the Iranian military was obliterated, and who said the ceasefire was a big day for world peace, who said the deal was largely finalized, who said he was heading into the Situation Room for his final determination, who sent the deal back with toughened terms, who posted destroyed in capital letters about Iran's nuclear stockpile, who said Iran was negotiating on fumes. That man sat down with CNBC and said the negotiations that might end the war he started have become boring. Boring. 97 days, 15 Americans dead, 538 wounded, $29 billion, 59 consecutive days of gas above $4 at $4.54 per gallon, oil climbing back toward $100, the Dow down 416 points in one day. The 10-year Treasury at 449, mortgage rates at their most expensive in 9 months, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at unheard of levels, falling 9.1 million barrels per week. One civilian dead at Kuwait International Airport. The House voting 215 to 208 to end the war. The Senate voting 55 to 45 to end the war. Kuwait expelling 2 Iranian diplomats. Iran threatening special events for Tel Aviv. The Iran war trends towards a quagmire. Trump is losing control of what lies ahead. And the president called the negotiations boring. That single word, boring, is the most revealing thing said about the Iran war since Trump defined ceasefire as shooting more moderately. And the Associated Press and CNN published their analyses simultaneously this morning, reaching the same conclusion at the same time about the same president managing the same war. President Donald Trump is facing warnings from foes and allies alike that he's getting boxed in on the Iran war, a conflict he sold as a brief military incursion, but that has since settled into a holding pattern, boxed in from both directions, from foes and from allies. Simultaneously, that is the strategic condition that every military planner and every diplomatic analyst knows is the most dangerous possible position for any actor in any conflict. Boxed in from both sides, unable to advance, unable to retreat, holding the current position as the costs accumulate and the options narrow and the clock runs toward November. Here is the angle that makes the AP and CNN simultaneous boxed-in analyses the most historically significant pair of news assessments published since the Iran war began on February 28th. The last week has repeatedly shown how Trump is being forced to grapple with this more claustrophobic political reality. First, there was his apparent retreat on controlling the Kennedy Center and, more significantly, his administration reversing itself on the anti-weaponization fund to compensate those who claim they were wronged by the Biden administration. Claustrophobic political reality. That phrase from CNN captures the specific quality of the box that Trump is now in. It is not just the Iran war box. It is a box that has been assembling across multiple fronts simultaneously. The Kennedy Center retreat, the anti-weaponization fund collapse, the Moody's downgrade, the big beautiful bill's Medicaid cut backlash, the Canada tariff backfire, the Alberta separation crisis, and above all, the Iran war that was supposed to be 4 to 6 weeks and is now in its 97th day with gas at $4.54 and the deal still not signed, and the president calling the negotiations that would end it boring. Each wall of the box was built from a different direction. Each wall represents a different front on which the administration has encountered limits it did not plan for. And together they describe a presidency that is not just struggling with one problem, it is simultaneously constrained in every direction. And the word that both AP and CNN chose for that condition, independently, on the same day, is boxed in. To understand exactly what the boxed in condition means in strategic terms, you need to go through each wall of the box that Trump has built himself into over the 97 days of the Iran war. Trump has called for unspecified changes to the agreement, and Iranian officials, perhaps calculating that the Republican president is reluctant to restart the bombardment after burning through key weapon systems, are showing no signs they'll give in to new demands. Wall 1, the deal wall. The text that both sides negotiators agreed to weeks ago has not been signed because Trump called for unspecified changes. toughened terms sent back. Iran said the text contradicts what Trump posted. Trump posted destroyed. Iran said negotiate over. Trump said sanctions no relief. Deal text said sanctions discussed. Trump said never nuclear. Deal text said limits. Every change Trump demanded created a new contradiction between what he said publicly and what the deal text could deliver. And Iran has calculated, correctly according to the AP's sources, that Trump is reluctant to restart the bombardment after burning through key weapon systems. Iran knows the weapons stockpile is depleted. Iran knows the U.S. will need years to replenish. Iran knows the budget didn't bake in the war. And Iran is using that knowledge as the specific leverage that allows it to show no signs of giving in to new demands. The man who said Iran was negotiating on fumes has discovered that Iran calculated his fumes more accurately than he calculated theirs. With midterm elections approaching and gas prices high, the administration faces pressure to deliver results or embrace lengthy negotiations. But a satisfactory outcome may require the boring, long-form negotiations that Trump rejected earlier this week. Wall 2. The election wall. The midterms are 5 months away. Gas is at $4.54 and has been above $4 for 59 consecutive days. The polls show Trump at 34% approval. Republican candidates in competitive districts are calculating the cost of being associated with a war that has produced those numbers. And the path out of those numbers, the path that reduces gas prices and improves approval and gives Republican candidates something to run on, is the deal. The 60-day MOU that opens the Strait of Hormuz and begins nuclear negotiations. The boring long-form negotiations that Trump rejected on CNBC. The boring negotiations are the ones that could save the midterms, and Trump called them boring. That contradiction between what the midterms require and what Trump told CNBC is the second wall of the box. He needs the boring negotiations to succeed. He publicly dismissed them as boring. And now his allies, the Republican members of Congress who are watching their November numbers and calculating their survival, are warning him that the boring path is the only path left, and he called it boring. Tehran already appears to have forced the president to rein in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Wall 3, the Netanyahu wall. Trump personally called Netanyahu and stopped him from conducting a major raid of Beirut. Trump described the imminent bombing of a capital city of 2 million people as a little glitch he quickly turned around. Netanyahu publicly accepted the restraint, barely, and then continued operations in Lebanon under a different framing. And Iran set the condition that no dialogue would resume until the Lebanon war ends. The Lebanon war has not ended. Hezbollah has not accepted the ceasefire. UNIFIL peacekeeper died today in a mortar attack near Marjayoun in southeastern Lebanon. A United Nations interim force in Lebanon peacekeeper died on Thursday morning after sustaining injuries in a Wednesday night mortar attack on a position near Marjayoun in southeastern Lebanon. The Lebanon wall says Trump cannot satisfy Iran's condition without a confrontation with Netanyahu that he is not willing to have. He cannot have the confrontation because Israel is the ally that provided the military partnership for the war he started. He cannot abandon the confrontation requirement because Iran will not resume talks without Lebanon's resolution. He is caught between his alliance with Netanyahu and his need for the Iran deal. And the specific trap: forced to rein in Netanyahu while unable to fully satisfy Iran's Lebanon condition, is the third wall of the box that has no clean exit. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf said, "No negotiations have been held with the U.S., and fake news is used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and escape the quagmire in which the U.S. and Israel are trapped." Wall 4. The credibility wall. Iran's parliament speaker is saying publicly that the negotiations Trump has been describing as proceeding nicely and at a rapid pace are not happening at all. That the deal Trump said was largely finalized and boring is not a deal that Iran's government acknowledges. That Trump's description of the diplomatic situation is fake news designed to manipulate oil markets. And the specific credibility damage that produces when the president of the United States says negotiations are proceeding well and the other government says no negotiations are happening is the fourth wall of the box. Every time Trump claims progress that Iran publicly denies, the gap between his description and their description widens. And the wider the gap, the harder it becomes to sign any deal that both sides can publicly characterize as consistent with what they said before they signed. A deal requires both sides to be able to claim they achieved what they said they were pursuing. And after 97 days of contradictory public statements, the space in which both sides can simultaneously claim victory has narrowed to almost nothing. Joe Kent, former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, recently resigned from his position to oppose the war started due to pressure from Israel. While announcing his resignation on X, he said, "I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby." Wall 5, the MAGA Civil War wall. Joe Kent, former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, not a Democrat, not a never Trumper, a Trump appointee, a man who served in the administration, who resigned specifically to oppose the war, and said it was started due to pressure from Israel. Former Trump ally and Congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, also criticized the war recently, calling it a perverted, deranged version of MAGA. This is absolutely absurd, and it's 100% a betrayal to what MAGA was supposed to be, she told CNN last week. Perverted, deranged, 100% a betrayal. Those words from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who campaigned for Trump in 2024, who has been one of the most reliable Trump supporters in the House, calling the Iran war a perverted, deranged betrayal of MAGA. Tucker Carlson called Trump a slave to Israel over the war. Joe Kent resigned from a Trump appointment to oppose the war. Marjorie Taylor Greene called it a betrayal. The MAGA coalition, the specific political movement whose energy and loyalty made Trump's second term possible, is fracturing on the Iran war. And the fracture is not healing because the war continues. Every day of continued war is another day that the Tucker Carlsons and the Joe Kents and the Marjorie Taylor Greenes have more evidence for the argument they are making, that this war was not MAGA, that it was the opposite of MAGA, that it was the globalist neocon intervention that MAGA was supposed to be the antidote to. The fifth wall of the box is made of the movement that put Trump in power, and it is cracking. The treacherous climate for talks was illuminated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio's 2 painful days testifying before House and Senate committees this week. He faced deep skepticism about the administration's approach, and not just from Democrats. The ex-Florida senator is one of the administration's most skilled communicators and offers the most coherent explanations on the war, even if they sometimes come across as retrospective polishing. Wall 6, the Rubio wall. Marco Rubio, 2 painful days before House and Senate committees, facing skepticism not just from Democrats but from Republicans. The most skilled communicator in the administration, offering explanations that come across as retrospective polishing. Retrospective polishing, that is CNN's characterization of what America's Secretary of State is doing before Congress. Not defending a coherent strategy, not explaining a deliberate plan, polishing the retrospective narrative of decisions that were made without a clear strategy and are now being explained after the fact. The 6th wall of the box is made of the diplomatic credibility that has been consumed in 2 painful days of congressional testimony by the man whose another way threat is the last remaining leverage in the negotiation that the president called boring. The shaky moment follows repeated claims by Trump since a 14-day ceasefire was agreed to on April 7th, following 38 days of U.S. and Israel bombing of Iran, that a deal is just days away and the Iranian side is begging to come to a settlement. Trump on Wednesday said it was possible something could come together over the weekend. Over the weekend. Of course he did. He has said the deal is days away 17 times since the ceasefire began. He has said largely finalized. He has said proceeding nicely. He has said the Situation Room final determination. He has said crummy agreement. He has said toughened terms sent back. He has said very well. And Iran said no significant progress. Same day. And now he has said over the weekend, and his allies and critics simultaneously are warning that the over the weekend is the same as all the previous timelines. It is a placeholder for a decision that cannot be made because every exit from the box leads to a cost that the political calculation inside the box makes unacceptable. Sign the deal and call it destroyed when the text says negotiate over political cost with Iran, rejecting the characterization, resume full bombardment and pay the military budget cost of burning through more depleted weapons stockpiles. Political cost with the MAGA civil war. Stay in the holding pattern and watch oil climb back toward $100 and gas stay above 454. And the midterms approach and the Republican congressional rebellion grow from 4 House members and 8 Senate members toward the next threshold. Political cost that compounds daily. The boring negotiations that Trump rejected are the ones that avoid the worst of those costs. And he called them boring, while his allies warned him he is boxed in. And the AP published its analysis this morning, and CNN published its analysis this morning, and both reached the same word, boxed in. The Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior fellow at the hawkish Washington think tank Foundation for Defense of Democracies, argues that remaining in the current status quo with Tehran, neither a full resumption of hostilities nor sealing an interim agreement to restart nuclear talks, is a situation that Iran appears better poised to exploit. Despite being the weaker party, Iran appears to be calculating that the longer the holding pattern lasts, the better the chances are they can box in Trump. The hawkish think tank, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. This is not the ACLU or Code Pink. This is the organization that has consistently advocated for maximum pressure on Iran. The organization whose analysis has driven some of the most assertive American positions on Iranian nuclear policy. And its senior fellow is saying Iran is calculating that the holding pattern benefits Iran, that the weaker party has found a way to use the holding pattern to strengthen its position. That time, which Trump said was on America's side when he called Iran negotiating on fumes, is actually running in Iran's favor because Iran does not face a midterm election. Iran does not face a MAGA civil war over its war. Iran does not face a Senate War Powers resolution requiring it to end the conflict. Iran does not face a stock market dropping 416 points when the ceasefire is tested. Iran does not face a strategic petroleum reserve draining at 9 million barrels per week. Iran simply has to wait, and waiting in the specific strategic conditions of June 2026 is the most powerful thing the weaker party can do. Now, the 3 scenarios for what the boxed-in condition produces. The first scenario is the box opens through a deal signed this weekend, as Trump suggested on Wednesday. The over-the-weekend timeline that Trump mentioned to reporters is actually achieved. The Lebanon ceasefire implementation agreement that was announced on June 3rd holds enough that Iran's no dialogue until Lebanon ends condition is partially satisfied. The Pakistani mediators restore communication. Trump accepts the deal text as close enough to his Situation Room post that he can present the nuclear limitations as the beginning of the destruction he promised. Iran accepts enough of the toughened language that Aragchi can tell domestic audiences the deal protects Iranian interests. The Strait of Hormuz opens. Gas begins its slow descent from 454. The oil reserves stop their 9 million barrel weekly drain. The Dow recovers its 416-point loss. And the AP and CNN analyses become the last chapter before the deal. The boring negotiations produced an agreement because they had to, because the box had only one exit left. The second scenario is the holding pattern continues and the box gets smaller. The over-the-weekend timeline passes without a deal. Iran's special events threatened for Tel Aviv produce another exchange of fire. The ceasefire deteriorates further. Oil crosses $100. Gas rises above 454. The Senate votes on its War Powers resolution. Trump's Republican congressional support erodes from 8 Senate defectors toward 10 or 12. The MAGA civil war between Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Joe Kent and the president intensifies as each week of continued war produces more evidence for their argument. And November approaches, the box gets smaller, the options narrow, and the president who called the negotiations boring discovers that boring was exactly the wrong word for the specific negotiations that were the only way out of the box he was in. The third scenario is the box collapses on one side and the war escalates beyond its current parameters. Iran's special events planned for Tel Aviv actually hit a significant target in Israel. Israel responds with the major Beirut raid that Trump stopped on June 3rd as a little glitch. The Lebanon front escalates beyond anything the current diplomatic architecture can contain. The Iran deal collapses entirely as the Lebanon conflagration removes any possibility of the ceasefire condition being met. Oil spikes above $120. Gas approaches $5 per gallon. And the war that was sold as 4 to 6 weeks enters its 4th month in an escalation phase that nobody planned for because the deal that would have prevented it was called boring. I want to be completely direct about what the AP and CNN simultaneously publishing the boxed in analysis on June 4th, 2026 actually means in the context of the 97-day history of this war. It means that the mainstream institutional media that has been documenting this war from the beginning has reached its verdict on the current strategic moment, not on whether the war was right or wrong, not on whether Iran is a good or bad actor, but on whether the president who started this war and has been managing it for 97 days is in control of where it goes next. And the verdict is no. He is boxed in from both directions, from foes who are calculating that the holding pattern benefits them, and from allies who are warning him that the boring negotiations he dismissed are the only path out of the box they can see. Trump is losing control of what lies ahead. That is CNN's sentence, not an opposition politician, not an anti-war activist. CNN and the AP said the same thing in different words. And neither of them said it on day 1 or day 30 or day 60. They said it on day 97. After the deal that was almost done was called boring. After the ceasefire that meant moderate shooting was defined from the Oval Office. After the president couldn't care less about negotiations that would end a war that is costing his party the November elections. That is the boxed-in verdict, issued simultaneously by the two most credible wire services in American journalism on the same morning, in the same hour, about the same war that the president called boring. My question for you today is this. Do you believe Trump will find a way out of the box that AP and CNN have simultaneously described this morning? Or do you believe the boring, long-form negotiations he dismissed are now the only remaining exit from a strategic position that becomes more constrained with every day that the holding pattern continues? Write your answer in the comments because this question determines whether the Iran war ends this weekend, as Trump suggested on Wednesday, or continues into the 100th day on Saturday with no deal and a box that has become so small that even the boring negotiations may no longer be accessible from inside it. And if this kind of deep, honest analysis that reads the AP and CNN simultaneously and tells you exactly what their simultaneous boxed-in verdict means for the war and for the presidency and for the country that has been paying $4.54 at the pump for 59 days while waiting for a deal that keeps being called boring is what you have been looking for. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Day 97, boxed in from both directions. And the negotiations that could open the box are boring. See you in the next video.